And I got to do baseball trading cards, which was wonderful, absolutely wonderful. And it was also wonderful because our client was the original maker of the bane of most mothers, and I can't tell you how many times I had to cut it out of my daughter's hair, bubble gum. Fleer, a good Philadelphia Quaker company, founded by the Mustons and run by the Mustons as I was there, invented bubble gum in 1928, and their gum was double bubble. Trial lawyers like to set the scene, so here we have in a court in Philadelphia the Quakers, the double bubble, pristine, pure, and on the other side, the defendants are the Shorins and Tops of Brooklyn, New York. And it was like, they even looked the part. Now, I have a lot of respect for the Shorins and for Tops out of Brooklyn. Great company. It just, you know, they didn't really believe in the antitrust laws. So I want to just very quickly be a little educational tonight, and I'll come back to the litigation story. But historically, baseball trading cards represent, and the history of them represent kind of the history of baseball in some ways. But the legal rights that are involved include the original litigation over the right to your own likeness and to control your own publicity and get paid for it. And I guess the best baseball trading card story, and a card that, believe it or not, has sold for $2.8 million, one thin card, is the Honus Wagner card. Now, we all know, I'm sure most people here know, Honus Wagner is that great Pittsburgh shortstop, voted. He didn't make the first one, but the second person voted into the Hall of Fame when it was established. And Honus Wagner, he had his own publicity deals. This is back in the 1800s, because trading cards of different kinds started in about the 1880s, and baseball became probably the most famous one, but there were a lot of others. They had little pictures on them. And they were used, among other things, for advertising the product that they were sold with. Now, the great old American Tobacco Company decided that their cigarettes needed more protection than they were getting in their packs, so they would put the baseball cards in to stiffen the pack and protect the cigarettes more. And they were just making cards. And Honus Wagner didn't like the fact that they didn't pay him for his card, so he actually filed a lawsuit, got upset, and as a result, they believe that only 100 or so of his likenesses actually got put in the packages. Well, that's a collector's dream, to be able to find one of those Honus Wagner cards. But Honus Wagner represents the fact that the player himself owns his likeness and it should be paid for any publicity that's utilized. The cards became involved with gum, and the tobacco companies got out of utilizing them. Tops, though, started using contracts with longer terms, and then they decided to not only sell baseball cards for the players that they had contracts with, but also with people that they didn't have contracts with that Bowman had. So Bowman sued them. And the result of that is Bowman won. So what did Tops do? Tops bought Bowman and got all the rights to the market. So that was in 1956. So for some of us who are doing our card collecting in the late 40s and early 50s, you may be able to find some Bowman cards. The first Tops cards actually came out in 1951, but in 1956, Tops pretty much had the market sewed up, and at that point in time, they were getting contracts that lasted 7 years. Fleer came along, always wanting to promote their gum, and of course Double Bubble and Bazooka were fierce rivals for gum. So Fleer came along, and Ted Williams had refused to sign a contract with Topps, but did agree to sign a contract with Fleer. So Fleer put out its first set of Ted Williams cards in 1959. Unfortunately, Ted became ill and retired from baseball, so they only had really 1 year. They then went out, Fleer did, and they got contracts with other retired famous stars, and they put out baseball trading cards of retired players. Then they were doing these contract wars, and they had enough contracts, 67 in fact, to put out a set of 67 cards. That is in 1963. But the set was not very successful. Let me tell you a little bit about the cards, because us antitrust lawyers, one of the things we see in this history is how the antitrust laws really worked the way they were supposed to work. Because the Topps cards, if you're the only game in town, you don't spend a lot of money on the photographers, you don't spend a lot of money on the cards. And I mean, those of us who used to pin them on the wheels of our bikes, no, they were cardboard, and they weren't real fancy, and they weren't real sturdy necessarily. And of course, they had the statistics on the back, and that's basically the way you can tell how old the baseball card is for sure. That's the way I tell all these, because I could turn it around and see the stats only go to 87, so I know it's an 88 card. Fleer then sued Topps, that's when I come in, and also the Major League Baseball Players Association. The Baseball Players Association started going to other gum companies, including Fleer, and said, hey, we can get the players to stop signing those Topps contracts if you agree and sign a contract with us. So when 8 years is up, we know you'll be able to produce this many baseball cards, because the players will stop signing those contracts. It was so far away, and it was so much money they wanted, Fleer said, no deal. Fleer then supported the Federal Trade Commission in the next big lawsuit. Unfortunately, the FTC concluded that since other companies could sell baseball cards with other products, that it wasn't unfair competition. Now, how they thought that a kid would go out and buy a loaf of bread to get a card versus going down to the store and getting a pack of gum with a card, I don't know. That to me is not the same market.
I used to buy Post cereal.
That's right, the cereal, the Post cereal. And there was Kellogg's had them, Drake's Donuts or Drake Cakes had them. So there were others, but Fleer disagreed with that ruling, disagreed with what was going on, so they filed the lawsuit. That's the one I was involved in, and ultimately it was an interesting fight lawyers-wise, because Topps defined the market, and that's what's critical. To show a monopoly, you have to be able to show domination of a substantial part of the market. Well, if the market is just baseball trading cards sold with gum, Topps had a monopoly. But Topps said, oh, no, no, no. The market here is anything a kid can buy for $1 in a candy store or a drugstore or whatever. And so that's how they defined the market, which meant that in our courtroom, they had a 40-foot-long candy stand with all this candy and all the stuff you could buy for under $1. Despite their efforts to fatten us all up and sweeten the judge, he disagreed, and he found that, in fact, their contracts and the way that the Baseball Players Association and Topps kept others out of the marketplace was a violation of the antitrust laws, and he issued an injunction, and now we're up to 1980, the end of 1980, and he said that by January 81, that the Players Association had to offer licenses to competitors. And immediately, Fleer and Donruss got licenses, and in 1981, for the first time, other companies could compete head-to-head against Topps with a full set of baseball cards.